Would you please, for the love of God and your own body, stop the damn hammering? I'm Jill Spivey.
And I'm Chris Spivey. And
I'm
today
Eddy
on
Webb.
Journalist, we talk about Scrooged, yet another holiday special. So I am super excited for this recording for a multitude of reasons. I will list them in a certain order as to avoid any sort of punishment for myself later. I'm excited that Jill has decided to join us today and that she chose this movie. My movie was to make it the musical Cats so that our listeners and Eddy could suffer. But that was vetoed. I'm also...
I noticed at the start of the episode that there's a certain similarity between both of your names.
I don't know what that would be. J and C are like a long way apart from the alphabet, my friend.
I feel like there was a day a long time ago when we walked down an aisle or something like that. I don't know.
I don't remember getting a medal from Princess Leia. I would definitely remember that.
Yeah, I have the pleasure of being Chris's wife, for those who don't know.
Well, welcome. Well, welcome to the podcast. I'm also really excited about this because last year I made Chris watch Batman Returns.
Wow.
So, this is definitely...
Yes.
And you may notice that my name for the recording is specifically chosen for Eddy today.
I actually didn't see it. Now I have to look.
Hang on.
Oh,
Batman
yes,
Returns.
I see the
Is
Batman
that the one
references.
Ugh.
Continue.
with Affleck? Is that... No.
No.
No, that was
Oh,
the
I
one
do
with
remember that
Danny
one.
DeVito
Michelle
as
Pfeiffer's
Penguin.
Catwoman.
Yes.
Yeah.
The incredible Christopher Walken
Yeah.
as a true villain of the entire
Yes.
piece.
Got it.
It is gloriously bad, but also at Christmas time is
Much
therefore
how
technically
Die Hard
Christmas
is
movie.
technically a Christmas movie.
I don't buy it.
Right. I am not
I'm with you,
on
Eddy.
team Die Hard as a Christmas
Iron Man
movie.
3 is also a Christmas movie. Both by Shane Black. So there you go. A little Shane Black knowledge for the podcast today.
Yeah, but also Hawkeye is a Christmas show, and that's way
Well,
more
there's
of
a Christmas tree that
actual
plays a
Christmas
vital
show.
plot point in that entire movie. Sorry, series. How else
Vital?
would we get an
Yes.
owl
Very
to
important.
go and eat two shrunk little henchmen in the most horrific scene imaginable that they do not show you?
That's just, I love that scene. It's like, well, that's funny, but also
The
deeply disturbing. Speaking of funny but deeply disturbing.
The funny part about this
movie.
is that we're all on camera and Jill is watching us banter back and forth thinking, is this what they do every time? Because she doesn't listen to our podcast. She's not our one listener.
Yes.
That is not fair. I have listened to it a couple of times.
So you're saying in
listened to it more
total
than
of
I have.
maybe 3 episodes. Eddy, how many episodes have we made so far?
We have made over 100.
It's not a great batting average, I'll be honest, but
But you know what?
Sure.
It is not 0, and therefore
Thank you.
we respect
The
and
other
appreciate
thing that
your
I'm super
patronage.
excited about today, in addition to having my lovely wife here, who I'm going to give a little stick to throughout the entire podcast, is I get to have a beer and record today. We usually record it in the dredge of night for me at 3 to 5 in the morning, and I'm doing all this for Eddy. But today we're recording around Eddy's dinner time. So us people that are in the real world, I just made a joke about being in America, calling it real world, and get to have a beer.
Yes, because it is past noon.
I mean,
Yes,
but there
past
are
noon now
breakfast
for you.
stouts, let's be real. So, yeah.
That's true. And since I'm England, I have been told more than once that it is past 5 o'clock somewhere in the Empire.
So, Jill, would you mind telling our audience a little bit about yourself, as they have no idea who you are? Are you a game designer? Are you an actress? Are you just an incredible mom with a daughter that looks up to you more than anyone else in the world? Are you a professional? Are you a scientist? These are the questions they want to know. Are you an editor that has to read the rough drafts of my work and tolerate it and act like you love it, be it good or bad?
So here's the deal. I am that editor, and I don't pretend to like it, because if I don't like it, you know that you know.
So you're a good editor. Excellent.
Yeah, so I am Chris's wife, I guess is my claim to fame in these circles. I am a mom. We have a lovely dog who is just a fluffy muppet, and I by day work as a marketing.
You don't have to say where you work.
I'm not
Our
gonna.
fan will come out and stalk you.
Well, they can stalk me anyway, you know. So I'm just saying. But yeah, I'm marketing director. It's not anything controversial, I don't think. And yeah, I when I met Chris, I didn't know that this whole world of TTRPGs existed. So that was
I'm sorry ahead of
a
time.
learning curve, let's say. When I met him, he was gaming like 3 or 4 times a week at that point. So that had to end in order for us to actually date and see each other. Um, but yeah, so that's kind of my story. My background is in acting and theater, and then that didn't pay the bills. So yay for corporate America. But I do work at a nonprofit, so I can feel good about the mission and the work that I do. Yeah.
Well,
But
that's cool. I'm actually well, your background would be cool about this because with Scrooged, we don't talk about this much in the podcast, but
Oh.
my background actually was in television production. And I have seen Scrooged, but it's been so long I had forgotten all the relevant plot points. So given what the topic of it is, it'll be interesting to talk about the acting,
I
television
worked in
intersection
television
of this
for
movie.
a grand total of 8 months. I was a temp at Lifetime Television.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to talk about
Oh,
that was
really?
an interesting experience. It was a very positive experience, but I was in the creative on-air promotions group. So part of my job was screening
Oh,
Lifetime movies for like what are the clips that we're going to include in the commercials. Um,
mm-hmm.
yeah, it was fun. I was like 22, 23, and that was like a really fun thing to do.
Yeah, I actually had a friend of mine. I still have a friend of mine. He's not dead or anything. But he's a scriptwriter, and he works in movies. And he told me like Lifetime's actually one of his favorite clients because they give him regular work. They pay on time. And always great to work with. So
Yeah.
it's actually really funny how
Yep.
the small world we have.
so you said that it didn't pay the bills is why you stopped, but Rent taught us that artists don't have to pay the bills. They'll have a
Right.
friend who will let them live for free for 3 to 5 years, and then when they come to try to kick them out, the artist will be in the right and their friend will be considered a capitalist and wrong.
Yeah, that's generally how it works. But I'm not. I mean, Bohemia, I love. In fact, I was saying to Chris, I love the apartment that Bill Murray's character that they inhabit together, right? And he said, "Why do you love it?" And I'm like, "'Cause
Yeah.
it's so bohemian. Like it is kind of what you think of as like a New York artsy apartment." So way too big. I
Yes,
know.
totally. I mean, way too big,
Everything
but
I
yes,
watch is
otherwise.
like, okay, well, that doesn't exist, but it's really cool. Yeah, yeah.
Right.
So I have done absolutely no research about this movie. I barely remember it other than the fact that it is one of Jill's favorite movies that she insists that we watch every year. This and Elf.
I don't
And
insist on Elf. I like Elf. There's nothing wrong with Elf. I know you don't love it. I like it. Your daughter likes it. It's charming and lovely. Um, Scrooged, while I insist on watching it every year, we definitely do not.
and while my holiday movie that I insist on that no one else will watch with me, The animated Hobbit movie from 1977 is the epitome of a holiday movie.
What are you saying that where there's a whip, there's a way is your idea of a holiday
If
theme?
that song was in that movie, yes, I would say that. But it is not. It is in Return of the King.
Is
The
it?
animated
Is
Return
it?
of the
Is it?
King.
Oh,
How do I know this?
oh, you're right. I'm sorry. I mixed up my
Hobbit movie?
psychedelic.
How do I know
lore
this?
of
I watched that
anime
Hobbit
movies,
movie
yeah.
every single year. I missed 1 year because of my daughter who
Right.
refused to watch it with me. And
I think
cried
she
a
went
little
out
on the
of,
inside.
out of the room crying is actually what happened. Yeah.
The goblins, well, it was Sting
I
and
believe
giant
that.
spiders.
I
And
completely believe
maybe
that.
like a 3-year-old that is not the best thing for.
But here's the thing. I don't mind the movie. It's not, I don't have the same, touch point that you do with it. But I can't hear it because you're singing over the whole thing.
That's part of it. That's part of the experience.
You
It
know.
elevates the movie.
Yes, does something. Sure does something.
Joe, can we have you on every week in this podcast from now on? Because this is amazing. Just hearing all the Chris anecdotes.
Eddie has to deal with them a little bit before we start recording, but you get them 24/7.
Yeah, I'm lucky that way.
So, all right.
So I'm curious actually. Jill, what is it about Scrooge you really love?
What is it I love? I love that it takes something that is kind of revered as a classic or something that's kind of stodgy and a little hard for people to relate to. And it takes it and it flips it, but then it ultimately tells the same story in a way that's more accessible. So I like that. I also think that the world is a really shitty place. Can we curse on this? Well, I am. And so it's nice to watch a movie that ultimately has like a really feel good, happy ending. Like that sometimes is hard to, that feels more genuine in its arc. So that's why I love it. And also, I am a Jewish girl who loves Christmas, always have. So I was really lucky when I met Chris, and all of a sudden, like, we could actually do Christmas things. I had never had, like, we didn't have a Christmas tree. We didn't have any of that. So I remember one of the first years that Chris and I were together, I think we had just moved to this house, and we got a new tree, and it was bigger than the one that we had in our postage stamp of an apartment. And Chris was busy.
We lived in DC. That was a nice size apartment for DC.
Yeah. You were busy writing I think you were busy writing Harlem Unbound at the time, maybe? Anyway, you were really busy. And I remember you said, "Oh, can you just go to the store and get lights?" And I was like, okay. I mean, I'd never done such a thing. So I remember standing in the Target, like looking at the lights, feeling completely overwhelmed. So I looked for like the person who looked most likely to know what they were doing, and they gave me lights. So anyway, long story short, I love Christmas, and this is a really lovely Christmas movie. I mean, I've got quite a few Christmas movies that I like. So,
can you give us your top 5? Can you give us your top 5 Christmas movies?
Well, so
less for the podcast, more for my own point of reference, but still, we'll use it for both.
My mother, who also obviously is Jewish, always loved Miracle on 34th Street. So that was like, that's a really good one. So I do love that one. I mean, it's hard not to love It's a Wonderful Life. Same kind of arc, just beautiful. I mean, I'm always in tears in that movie, like always, always, always. So that's really good. I really love Elf. I love that they were able to make a classic movie in a modern era. Like, I just think that's awesome. I don't know what my 5th is. I mean, those are kind of my clinch. Well, I guess I could go back to White Christmas, which I love.
Yeah.
Not holiday.
Not holiday. You know where I'm about to go. Do you want to tell that story? We're telling stories today, so that's the whole podcast. Is Jill and Chris telling stories and Eddie laughing. Tell them about the Holiday Inn, please. We were going out for about 6 months. 6 months at most.
Inns. Oh, do you want to tell the story? You can.
No, I'm just adding that timeline to it.
So yeah, Holiday Inn is a classic. I mean, classic movie. If you haven't seen it, you really should. But we had seen it before, but had clearly forgotten that Holiday Inn.
No, all right, I'm gonna have to jump in. We had seen it at one point in time separately in the past.
Yes.
We hadn't seen it recently at all, and definitely not together.
No, and we were 6 months into our relationship. We had met in June, and it was now Christmas time. We're like, oh, let's watch it. We like old movies, and yeah, let's watch it. Forgot that there was a blackface scene. So cool. That was really awkward.
Bing Crosby comes out in blackface singing about how the enslaved people should have been happy that they were that way as Abraham Lincoln. Little bit in there. It's a big scene. Like, it's a solid middle showstopper scene in the movie. This is like, back.
Yeah, so that put a damper on the evening, I will say. But White Christmas, on the other hand, is pretty much the same story, some of the same music, and does not have the blackface. So recommend White Christmas. Long story. It's exactly it.
No blackface, thumbs up.
So they pulled a Patrick Troughton, basically. There you go, Eddie. The second Doctor, Patrick Troughton, one of the things he wanted to do for the Doctor Who was he wanted to play the Doctor originally in blackface. And they said, how about we not do that? And he said, okay, we won't do that. But he found a way in one episode for him to be an antagonist to the Doctor in brownface for an entire 7-serial run of the show. Speaking with a very bad fake accent.
Oi. Yeah. That's
Mexican accent. He was a Mexican man. Yep. It was the 60s. Which means that they were just racist, but in black and white. Anyway.
So Scrooge.
Are we going to talk about Scrooge? Or are we telling more stories? So back in my day, I've got... No.
Let's give the listeners what they want.
Okay, so Chris, I do not in any way, shape, or form doubt your ability to inject stories at any and all points during this podcast. So I'm not cutting off your story options. I'm simply now distributing them throughout the actual plot of the movie.
Look at that. I'm always in awe of your professionalism, your dedication to our cause to create enjoyable content for our listeners.
So Scrooge, you said you did not do any research. Jill, do you know much about the backstory behind how this movie was made or anything?
Because I do love the movie, and so I'm always curious. And I had, you've heard various things about Bill Murray. Everybody's heard various things about Bill Murray, right? Like, maybe he's not so great to work with.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was, digging a little bit on that, he hadn't been in a lot of films, even though he had been in Ghostbusters, and that was huge. He hadn't been in a lot of films for a while, and he was looking for a way to like do his big comeback. And he didn't find scripts that he liked, but he liked something in Scrooged, but he didn't like the script. So he agreed to do it, but only if they trashed the script and kind of started over. So... except for everything.
I like this project except for everything written down.
So that's kind of what they did. I mean, he and the creators rewrote the script. Ultimately, I don't think he was particularly happy with the way it turned out. It got slammed in reviews, like was not reviewed well. Only after a few, after years, now people appreciate it more. And then I also, I read about, like, I don't know, I've read about a lot of things because I love Carol Kane. I love her character in this. I just think she's such a comic genius. And so
Oh
apparently
God, yeah.
she really hit him in all of these scenes. Like maybe not all of the times that she hit him, but like she really actually, like there was a point where they had to stop production for a couple days for him to recover from his injury.
Yes, actually, I did I watched this on Amazon on Prime Video, and they have those little trivia things. And one of the things I remember from that is that the scene where she grabs his lip and pulls down. Apparently, she pulled so hard that
Yeah.
he
And
had to stop doing
apparently
it for 2
she
days so he could heal.
hated doing it. Like she didn't want to do it. There was some kind of insistence, either she insisted or he insisted or something like that, but she would be crying on set because she was like hitting him and hurting him. So anyway, a little, it just brings an interesting perspective to watching it. But that's what I know about. I mean, that's what I know about its initial production, was that it was like not really destined for greatness.
Yeah, that was kind of a little bit of research again. It's kind of the vibe I got as well. I also know that the producers were not bullish on it themselves. And so apparently a lot of the initial marketing really heavily leaned on the fact that Bill Murray was in Ghostbusters, and this also had ghosts in it. So there's lots of like, it's Bill Murray, he's with ghosts again, but now there's 3 of them, kind of vibe. And this came out like right after Ghostbusters 2, which also kind of tanked. So there was definitely a lot of trying to capture a certain lightning in a bottle that just didn't happen on multiple fronts. But Scrooge certainly seemed like it was kind of a casualty of that. I know for my part, again, like I think I may have watched this on like VHS once, back when Blockbuster was a thing, kind of like, oh, let's rent this for Christmas. But I had forgotten just absolutely everything about it. And I know for me, the 2 things that I walked with, one is like, you're right, it is a lot better than history has painted it. I think because maybe we as a culture are a little more amenable to black comedy, which this definitely is. But also, this is the most 80s thing I think I've watched in a while. Because like every pop culture reference was like, man, I lived through that decade, so I get that. But there are so many people who will not understand what's happening right
absolutely.
now.
I mean, I kept thinking, like, I don't know. I mean, it's not right for our daughter yet, but I don't know that she will enjoy it as much because she will not understand a lot of it.
Right. Like, why?
Right.
Who is Bob Goulet, and why is that funny? Right.
Or
the horrible Richard Pryor joke that they make in the movie.
That's a bad one.
I had to explain that to Jill the other night.
I had forgotten all of that story about Richard Pryor. Like I had forgotten that he was burned. I had forgotten. He set
himself on fire.
Well, yes. Yep. So, but I had forgotten that until you reminded me, and I was like, oh, now I get that.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. There are certain points where it's like, this is also a very 80s movie in bad ways too. But I mean, it was like, little things like I found out that the guy who was supposed to play, the Ghost of Christmas Past was really supposed to be played by Sam Kinison. Right, it would have been very different, but also like the most 80s cast of musicians ever, right?
Since we're getting into the movie details itself,
Sorry,
since we're getting to the movie details itself, how about we just start doing the synopsis and we do it bit by bit, so we can interject those there. Unless there's anything specific about the actors themselves you want to go into, or any more of the production. But this feels very much like it's tied to the plot, so we could like hit those as we go through the plot beats.
So I have a question for you before we go on. I noticed that your microphones are like really big and mine's like really small when I talk. Does that matter? Okay. I just making sure from a recording standpoint. I'm like, is what I'm saying even matter? Okay.
Everything you say matters.
Yeah, no, the in production. Yes.
Okay.
But no,
don't want to get
it will
all
be
this and then be like, haha, just kidding.
Yeah. No, I mean, I can hear you fine, cool. And that's all that matters. So.
All right. So, as always, people, we have never really
Right.
decided anything beforehand. Who would like to read? Would you like for me to read? Would you like to read? Would you like for us to put Eddie on the spot and have Eddie read a little bit?
I'll read. I haven't done one of these in a bit. IPC television executive Frank Cross is pushing his company to broadcast an extravagant live production of A Christmas Carol on Christmas Eve, making the staff work throughout the holiday. Frank fires executive Elliot Loudermilk for disagreeing with him and sends cheap IBC monogram towels to most of the people on his Christmas list, including his personal assistant Grace and his brother James. While the powerful and influential people on this list each get an expensive four-head hi-fi stereo VCR. Seeing the stress Frank is under with the production, Frank's boss, Preston Rhinelander, brings in consultant Bryce Cummings to provide assistance, though Bryce secretly wants Frank's job.
Yeah,
I think it's a good kind of place to stop there. First of all, yeah, the VCR thing is like, again, peak 80s.
Yes.
that VCR was like top notch.
Better than two. It was huge too. It was. I saw when they had the full box out. And I was like, you can kill someone with that.
Like, you get a towel or this gigantic thing, and there's nothing in between. Like, there's not, there's no present that's like, I don't, a set of knives or like something that's smaller than a VCR at the time. Yeah.
Right. And that's one thing. I mean, I kind of dug going into this movie because like, this is not a movie that's subtle. There's nothing subtle about this film. And so Bill Murray plays Cross, like hyperbolic bad guy. And so of course everything else is also equally, like you said, like, is a towel, there's a gag about a shower curtain as a gift or this expensive VCR thing. Like, it's the huge contrasts, which I think really help kind of sell some of the humor of the movie.
His challenge, that Bill Murray's challenge in having to play a really bad guy, then at some point developing a self-awareness so that he's a good guy was really difficult for him. Like, how could he be so bad and then, become the savior at the end? Yeah.
Right.
So when we started watching this movie, I had forgotten how it opens. And to see the Santa being invaded and saved by the $6 million man, I could not stop laughing.
Yes.
Even though I was laughing, I realized that the people I think that made Bad Santa, starring, God, I forgot his name now, but he plays Hellboy and he was in Stranger Things as a sheriff and he was Black Widow's father in the Marvel movies, is a gun-toting killer Santa in a current day movie. So whoever saw this said, you know what? That would be a really good movie. And they went and they made Killer Santa.
Wasn't it like The Night the Reindeer Died or something like that?
That was the name of it. Love it.
It's fabulous. It really is fabulous because you can totally see it. I mean, especially during the 80s. Like, that was like, all of those kind of movies, not about Santa necessarily, brandishing a large gun, but yeah, it was very, as you were saying, Eddie, like very of the 80s for sure.
And
yeah, like I could imagine a TV movie with Lee Majors playing this badass. Yeah, I mean, it's slightly, it is over the top, right? It's a ridiculous premise, but also it's weirdly aged well because like you could look back and now going, did that movie actually exist? Because I can almost kind of see that movie existing because it's parodying the 80s movies in a way that you usually have to be further away from the decade to do, and they're doing it inside of that decade, which is really, really amazing.
I also really like the way that they do start out the movie with the meta movie. I mean, I like that it's not, they don't start from showing Frank Cross in the room with the executives. You start in the movie, and I like that. I thought that was a really nice.
Yeah, because if you go in not knowing anything about it, you're like, is this the movie I'm watching? It has Lee Majors in it. Where's Bill Murray? Oh, wait, okay, now I see what's going on. But yeah, at that minute of like,
So,
what's
as you
going
people
on
with
here?
actual television experience, when they give us the executives and with Bill Murray at the table with them, is that how it would really have played out? Does it have a real world vibe to it, just elevated slightly, like by 100,000%?
I wasn't in those rooms to be able to say one way or another.
I mean, I wasn't in television movies, but I've been in video game rooms, and that's not too far away, right? Like, I'm going to show you a thing, have an executive come in and just shit all over it, make fun of it, and then try out the thing that he made and tell everyone is supposed to like that. I certainly have never worked with that creative director in a company that happened to make an MMO at this point in time.
Whale.
But the other thing that weirdly resonated with me is also reminded me of Max Headroom, the TV show, because Max Headroom also had tense boardroom scenes on a television network, and all the screens up on the wall and the executive berating everybody and making fun of them, and I'm like, so it's like, again, Max Headroom was also a satire of television production, so it really resonated with me on that front. But again, I was just not expecting initially a movie like, oh, this is going to be about television specifically, which, given that it was a theatrical movie, is an interesting. Because Max Headroom is a television show about a television show, so there's a certain kind of meta-ness, but also it's using the television format to talk about the television format. This is a movie talking about the television format, and that adds a different resonance, even though we're all watching it on TV screens
As
now.
we
So
originally
it
watched
loses some of
Network, as
that.
we were watching it, it was giving me sort of callbacks to Network and how it was playing out throughout the entire course of that movie also. Especially when we get to the end, it just like hammers
Mhm.
it home almost 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, Sports Night, another good example.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good television about how terrible television is.
Yeah, and
Do you remember?
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and television as it was being made in the 80s is probably very different than how it's being made now. I mean,
Yes.
at Lifetime when I worked there, we used VHS. Like that's how we screened things. Like that. I'm so old, you
Yep.
guys. I'm so old.
No, same. Like I have a really good knowledge of how to do deck to deck recording, which is completely useless. Nobody does this anymore, right? I know how to chroma key things, Jill. No one does chroma
Yeah,
key.
no, that's knowledge of the dinosaurs now. Yes. Yeah.
Right, I know. Speaking of dinosaurs, it took me actually a surprisingly long time to realize that was Bobcat Goldthwait, because I did not realize he had a normal speaking voice.
He actually has an even more normal speaking voice. You can hear him now. I mean, yeah, like that still was his like more
Really?
of his character voice. But yeah, he has a more normal sounding speaking voice, which is pretty. Yeah, it's strange when you think of him as just.
I'm so used to that kind of. I mean, near the end of the movie, he's doing his kind of persona voice, but like
Yeah.
he was doing a reduced version of it here, and of course he had his hair back and the glasses, and so for like about 2 minutes, I was like, that looks vaguely familiar, and then there's a crackle or something in his voice, and I was like, oh my god, that's Bobcat.
I mean,
So
this is
when was Police
jumping.
Academy?
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to make a Police Academy joke. Please go. Yours would be more pertinent than my joke.
No, I was going to say, and this is jumping ahead a little bit in the
Go ahead.
chronology.
We have no format here.
But so the gun scene with him, brandishing a gun in the workplace, like I will tell you, that takes on a different feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's because I'm
Yeah.
older and so therefore I understand it more, or because our society is so much more gun heavy and shootings heavy. But it definitely takes on like a, ooh, that's cringy. That's super cringy. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say it there, but yes, as we're here, I mean, like certainly disgruntled white man goes into workplace with semi-automatic rifle plays very different in 2023 now. It's not nearly as funny. It's just like, "Ugh, that's not okay." But all the stuff up to that, I mean, is kind of his overall collapse is that kind of, again, that black humor of what is funny about this horrible thing happening. It's just that one piece. Society has changed in
Yeah.
such a way that
Can we
that piece
potentially talk
really
about
doesn't
stricter
land
gun
well. I
laws though,
agree with
because
that.
he was only able to purchase a shotgun
That
that
is
was a
true.
two-shot shotgun compared to what he probably could have gotten.
True. That's true. That's true. It's true.
And the room goes quiet as we contemplate the horror associated with that comment. Oh,
Yes.
so I don't remember when Police Academy was done, but I'm trying to figure out mentally if all right. And I think he showed up in
84.
Police Academy 3, if I remember. This is how much I know of my 80s movies. Because that's when they got new recruits to come in. He was one of the new recruits. Why do I remember Police Academy? Like out of everything I could know, that is wasted
Yes. Bobcat Goldthwait did come
wasted
in
brain
in
space.
3, and that was
So
86.
I guess that must have got him this role, which is an interesting transition, somewhat for an actor, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, like, this is just how my brain works, but like, I recently have gotten a bunch of DVDs of the Space Ghost Coast to Coast animated talk show parody thing, and he was on that. But that was in the early '90s. Kind of his career was winding up stage of things. So really, yeah, Bobcat's career is kind of like 85-ish to 90, and that's basically it. So it was very
In
much
case any of our
very
listeners and
specific
possibly
cultural
one of our
moment.
hosts don't know, what is Space Ghost Coast to Coast, Eddie?
Oh, Space Ghost Coast to Coast was one of the first original Cartoon Network shows. I think it was the first original Cartoon Network show. And the idea was they would recycle animation from the cartoon Space Ghost and turn it into a satirical talk show where Space Ghost has enslaved his enemies to act as his band leader and producer. And Space Ghost tries to have interviews with people. And they would actually interview people with one set of questions and then edit them against a completely different set of questions. So it was just what
How
can we
do
do with editing?
shows like that get made? This is who pitches that and it get I'm s- I
I can tell you how it got made
fair.
because it's cheap. Because they were in Atlanta, they had easy access to a bunch of C-list celebrities because they would go through Turner on their way to their actual jobs. They could pull them into a dark room, ask them 30 minutes of questions, and then edit that footage however they wanted. And they already had the license for the
So,
cartoon stuff.
Eddie, you keep saying Space Ghost like I should know who Space Ghost is. Who is Space Ghost?
No, you shouldn't. No, you really shouldn't know who Space Ghost is. We should just move on from this topic now, because Space Ghost is not worth. He's a Hanna-Barbera character. That the only reason why I know him is because
What?
of this show making
So,
fun of the fact
Space Ghost is a Hanna-Barbera character who had two sidekicks, I want to say Jan and Jaina, and their space monkey Gleep. And they went around the galaxy potentially trying to fight crimes and do justice. So it started as a solid sci-fi action show that was not very well done, and then he became the comic trope that people are associating him with. Duh.
Okay, 1, nerd. 2, solid sci-fi action show.
Duh.
3, nerd.
And double duh. How do I know that? I watched a lot of TV as a kid. And we've established my brain is nothing but
You're not
useless
wrong.
space. Moving on from that, though. The fact of seeing Robert Mitchum in this, that I had forgotten he's in it, as a head of like everything,
yes.
Hilarious to me because I knew him as like a dark, evil character and not a comical take that he is here. Talking about animals and television. Which, speaking of which, our dog Ziggy looked up at the TV when the animals came on. So he's not wrong.
Okay, so yeah, that's the other thing. During this, Preston Rhinelander talks about how they want to market more television for animals, and so he's like, you know what? Don't make a whole show just for animals. That would be crazy. But just introduce put like a mouse in the show or something. So something for the cat audience because some number of pets watch TV. and we want to cater to that audience, which on the one hand is a pitch perfect marketing joke because it's like, how does this actually, work? But on the other hand, it's also not entirely a joke because there are video games that actually do market to animals. So, for example, they have iPad games now for cats, where they actually have little mice go across the screen, and if the cat bats at the iPad surface, then it'll react and make noises that are pleasing for cats. So it's both a marketing joke and also a real thing.
Well, look, we watch the show All Creatures Great and Small. Highly recommend. Totally not
Uh-huh.
The new one, not the old one.
Highly recommend. That's true.
Oh, okay. Not the Peter Davison
and
one.
when our dog hears that music come on, she's like, "All right, it's my show," because it's all these animals in it. Yeah, she gets really excited. So it's been off for a while. We really need it to come back because she needs
The
some
Peter Davis.
entertainment.
Sadly, my boxer's into professional wrestling, so
The Peter Davison
can't have
version
this.
is too focused on the humans, not enough animals.
Yeah, she needs more animals.
Yeah, it is. It is no. All Creatures Great and Small, except for the
If
actual
Peter
creatures,
Davison
totally
walked
rated.
around dangling a piece of string, maybe it would be more engaging.
I will point out that Peter Davison was in fact a cow at one point in time, so it's not entirely.
That's a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy joke. Is I? Because
It
we're
is
on
a Hitchhiker's
camera.
Guide to the Galaxy.
42. That's what I know.
We're on
42.
camera, and Jill looks like, "What is he talking about?" So I felt I had to like give you that one.
The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy TV show, Peter Davison played
It was a roll-on
a
role.
walk-on or roll-on.
It was a
part as
bit
cow.
part.
Yeah. Anyhow, pew pew. Grace.
I love it.
I have been that personal assistant, and that kind of hurt to watch because I've worked with that executive.
Me too. Speaking of animals, should I tell this story about when I was a temp in New York? And I worked, I'm not going to say the name of the company, but it was her company. And I was her assistant for like, I think a week, maybe two. It's a blur. But speaking of animals, so she was really hard to work for. She had a dog who came with her every day to work. And she put up a gate at her office door, so I would like literally have to climb over this gate in order every time she called me into her office to do something, which was often. That same week her dog was having a birthday, and so I was in charge of like arranging the party, making sure that we had cookies that were in the shape of dog bones. Like, I'm telling you the whole thing. And then at last minute she says, "We don't have, who has a camera? Who has a camera?" Nobody had a camera. This was like, early 2000s. So she made me run down to the Dwayne Reed, which existed at the time. And like, I'm running and sweating and getting one of those disposable cameras. And I came back just as they were finishing singing Happy Birthday to this dog. I mean, I have many stories about that place. That place was experience. So yes, I have worked for similar people.
Jill, for our non-New York based fan base, what is a Dwayne Reed?
It's like a drugstore. So Walgreens bought them, so they're no longer Dwayne Reed, or there might be a few who are still named Dwayne Reed, but that's what you went to in New York when you needed to go to a
As
drugstore.
you're telling New York stories, can I ask you to tell my favorite New York story?
I don't know which one you're talking about.
What famous comedian's daughter did you share rooms with in New York?
Oh, got it. So when I moved to New York, I don't know if everybody is going to care about this, but whatever, I'll say it anyway. You can always cut it out. When I moved to New York, I didn't know where I was going to live. And this was before there were like online things to find roommates. And so there was a bus, a bus stop thing, and it had a thing where you pulled it off. There was like a little tab, you pulled it off. Hey, I'm looking for somebody to sublet my place for the summer.
Right.
So I went, and it was this old woman. Truly, she was in her 80s. Had this apartment on the Upper West Side, right off of Central Park West.
Is that a good neighborhood for our
And
non-New York-based listeners?
yes, the Upper West Side is a lovely neighborhood, and Central Park West is gorgeous. And so this is like a doorman building, which is a big deal. That is not something that I would have ever been able to afford. But
Wow.
it was a rent controlled building. So this old woman, rented this apartment, but then sublet 2 rooms in her 3-bedroom apartment. And so the 2 rooms were rented out to a musician. That was the one I subletted from, and an actress. Becky, if you're out there, hi. Anyway, so the old woman's name was Maxine Marks, and she was the daughter of Chico Marks, one of the Marx brothers.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
so she has a book. If anybody wants to learn more about Maxine Marx's life and her father, Chico, but I would hear stories during my 3 months living there of, like, her people coming over her house for parties, her being in a bathroom, and like Katharine Hepburn walks in crying, like things like crazy stuff.
Wow.
So it was quite the experience for this. I was a baby, and I didn't, I guess I wish I had stayed in touch with her after I left New York, but it's a long story. But I mean, she died soon
Yeah.
after, because she was elderly, but that apartment was fabulous. And her stories were awesome too. So that's my,
That
yeah.
does sound amazing.
Well, moving us
It
back
was a
from
whole different time period.
from
We
great New
digress.
York stories to the horror of New York that is Scrooged in the 80s. And having worked in a lot of different jobs in my time, I've had numerous bosses like Bill Murray's character Frank from this movie, and I've seen them fire people how they fired Bobcat Goldthwait from this movie, almost in the exact same manner, where all their stuff is gone.
Yeah.
Or better yet, they fired an entire division of people by having them go outside for a picnic, and then when the people tried to go back in, none of their badges worked, and all their belongings were brought out to them. So to see that brought back memories of that I've seen happen to other people in the workplace, and it is still hard to watch. But to think that people that did it probably had the same amount of joy that he got out of doing it too.
Yeah. Yeah. He's it's interesting. You're mentioning, Jill, about how Bill Murray struggled with the arc, but I mean, certainly at this start, he is nailing the villain part really, really
Totally.
well.
Yeah, I mean, I believed him. I believed him.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think we've all, I mean, if you haven't experienced a boss like that, then God bless you. And I hope that you are
Yeah.
aware of how lucky you are. But yes, some of us have had some pretty terrible bosses along the way. So yes,
Indeed.
Grace definitely
Indeed.
can relate to her. She's and the story, I also read that apparently in the original draft, her family life wasn't really built out very well. And that's something that they went in and revised to show more of her family, which I
Good.
really appreciated. I think it brings, I mean, obviously it mirrors the Dickens story.
Sure.
But
Right.
it's also just, I think, gives more depth to the movie.
So,
right. I mean, it's clear that Grace is supposed to be the Bob Cratchit in this, but I mean, it's still a good thing because the assistant who is abused by their boss and are only doing his job because they don't have any other alternatives is such a very timeless story. That's one piece of the Christmas Carol that ages really well.
hearing you say that is interesting, given the
Alfred
fact
Woodard.
that I know that you said Bill Murray kind of went over the credits and helped them redo it. I can't imagine Bill Murray adding into that role, because I know for Ghostbusters, originally the Winston character for Ghostbusters was supposed to have been like a retired Air Force captain and been part of the group, and that's when they envisioned Eddie Murphy to do it. But instead, then they went back and cut Winston's role down to what you get from that movie. So I can't see him going and adding in additional content for another actor. But that's just my interpretation of Bill Murray.
Well, and maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it was the producers once they looked at it, the creators, and said, like, I don't know if it was Bill Murray who expanded that. It may not have been.
Sure. I mean, if you look at it atomically, they probably could have done extra reshoots and not needed Bill for any of those scenes, except, I mean, like, they had to have had the one where he confronts Grace's family, obviously, but then all the stuff outside of that, they didn't need Bill on set for that, so they could have done all reshoots afterwards.
I think it's really powerful when he's with the Ghost of Christmas Present, and he's looking in on their family. Like, I just think that's a really beautiful thing, especially when you have seen his past, and his family, which, I mean, I cry every time. I'm like going to cry just talking about it. When you see, his father, who's actually played by one of his brothers, in real life. So Bill Murray's three brothers are in awesome. The film.
Oh,
so
wow.
Yeah, his father is played by one of his brother, and his brother in the film is played by one of his brothers. And then there's another, I forget the other one.
Huh.
But anyway, it's really,
That's
it's
wild.
pretty wild. Nepotism, nepo babies, isn't that what they call it? But yeah, I just think it's really touching to see that contrast.
Maybe, Eddie, do you want to read the next bit, the next paragraph, which I think touches on this part?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'll read it. The night before the show, Frank is visited by the ghost of his mentor, Lou Hayward, an also unloved miser who died from a heart attack 7 years prior. Lou warns him 3 more ghosts will appear to him over the next day to help Frank avoid the same fate. Before it vanishes, the ghost dials up Claire Phillips, Frank's lost love from years ago. Claire comes to the network to talk to Frank, but Frank does not make time for her, and she returns to her homeless shelter where she works.
Do we want to read the second paragraph too that directly hits then we go back there? Cool.
Yeah, I'll read it. Yeah. Okay. As rehearsals start and Frank wraps up his lunch with Preston, Frank is visited by the ghost of Christmas past, appearing as a manic taxi driver. He takes Frank to see his past, how he found solace in television to compensate for a cold and distant father, and how he had fallen in love with Claire, but lost her when he prioritized his television career over her. So yeah, I just kind of cover all of that. I do want to jump back to the Lou Hayward
I
moment.
miss real special. I miss like physical special effects so much. You're saying sorry.
Well, yeah, I mean it's not good. The special effects are not good, but I think that actually works in the show's favor because the golf ball that pops out and a mouse comes out of his skull. You don't want that to be realistic, right? You want that to be a funny moment, but you also have to believably think that it is a horrifying moment. And so I think the fact that it's crappy physical effects actually threads the needle perfectly for tone.
Our dog Ziggy looked up at the mouse the entire time.
Yeah.
Just gonna keep adding in Ziggy's feedback. She popped up, stared at the mouse the whole time. The mouse went away. Her head went back down.
When is Ziggy coming on the podcast?
I mean, she's here. She's
just not a very vocal member of the podcast.
No, exactly. Yeah, I love that whole premise of his old boss, rising from the dead. I just think it's like, I don't know. There's something about, that character. Like, I knew people in my life kind of like that character. I love that whole thing. And it was disturbing to me as a kid. I remember feeling quite horrified by it as a kid. And it's gross. I mean, it is gross. It's gross. But then the comic relief, particularly of like him shooting the gun and then him drinking the booze and it's coming out of those holes. I mean, it's just, it's silly and wonderful. And like, it adds humor to something that if it could be played a different way in a different movie. Right.
And I do remember you talking and you brought up the fact that drink that Bill Murray kept drinking the whole time, like vodka and tab. And
Oh
and
God,
how you can
yeah.
in drinking in the office, how that was very 80s, not so much now. So beautiful touchstones to the
Yeah.
time. But to your point about him shooting the full of holes, the fact that he does that and Lou says, "Watch, I don't mind you shooting me, but be careful of the Bacardi." Going back to how important that booze is. Oh,
Hmm.
Right. Well, and that an executive would be drinking Bacardi. At the time, that was
mm-hmm.
probably like something that executives liked to drink more. Now that would
Yeah,
be
that
replaced
was
with
good
scotch
booze.
or whiskey
That's what
or
it should be.
whatever. It would not be that. So also a sign
Yeah.
of the times.
Similarly, like Stoli vodka at the time was like top tier vodka before it became so prevalent now. So again, it's like it's something that, again, it's aged well because like at the time these are probably, like you said, pretty high profile executive drinks, but now they're seen as kind of the things you find in the supermarket. So Bill Murray being kind of trashy and not getting the excess also plays well,
Mhm,
actually.
mhm.
But but vodka and tab again,
Oh,
peak
Well,
80s.
and what's his joke about the Stoli at one point? Stoli touched by Chernobyl or something like that?
oh,
Yes, yes, touched by Chernobyl, another
Right.
80s joke.
Yeah.
Uh,
and but
um,
the fact that it has all
and
that
then
humor
okay.
associated with horror, but then it goes strictly into horror when Lou pushes him through the window and hanging over the top of it. Undercut again by comedy of him saying, "Please no," because they think I would jump. Like horror humor, beautifully executed.
Yeah, and like I mean, he breaks his mentor zombie's arm. The femur snaps. Like we get a close up of the femur snapping as he falls to his death, and it's like this is a fun Christmas movie. It's amazing.
It's good. And then when he, jolts up, um, you know, wakes up
Hmm.
from whatever, or it's just a really nice transition too. Like it's well done.
Yeah, I mean that's one thing I did notice is the lighting change is like when Bill Murray's character is with the ghost, the lighting is different than when he's in the quote unquote real world. And it's not an obvious thing, but the lighting is obviously a little more ethereal, a little more kind of unfocused, harsher lights, so you get stronger shadows. And the real world, it's more kind of natural three spot lighting that you typically get on sets. Little things like that, where it's like for a movie that it sounds like was kind of put together probably with shooting script being written the day of, they still clearly cared about some people on this product clearly cared about detail and really wanted to make this shine. So it's
Do you
Yeah, and I
amazing.
turned to Chris kind of at the beginning of it and said, I don't who wrote the music? Like I didn't know. And I looked up later and I saw it was Danny Elfman, which is like,
Hmm.
okay, I mean, he's iconic, right? We all know his work. And then I read that the music wasn't even released as an album until like
wow.
2011.
Really?
So somehow, some way, and I think that just goes to show like it was not a well-regarded movie. Like it was not, so they didn't even bother to put the music
Do you,
together for an album. I
it's
thought that was
unbelievable.
interesting.
But do you know why it was shot so well? It was directed by a little known director.
Why?
You may not have heard of him, Richard Donner. He had like a small little film in
Oh,
'78 that had a big impact on an entire genre. In case our listeners don't know, he helped direct and like make sure a little movie called fucking Superman 1978 with Christopher Reeves happened, all because little known director Richard Donner, director of Scrooge. That is why this movie is so amazing.
so the more we talk about this, the more I feel like Scrooged is a movie that like a bizarrely high level of talent signed up for, and then they
Yeah.
all kind of agree we will never discuss this. We will never talk about this.
Yeah. Well, and I had read,
Like
we had talked about Robert
Mm-hmm.
Mitchum, right? And I had read that
mhm,
he really didn't want to do it, which not surprising. And they
mhm,
said because it was a bit part. I mean, it's not a big role, and he's a big movie
yeah.
star. But they said, well,
Hmm.
just meet with Bill Murray and then we can talk. And apparently, Bill Murray, as he does, charmed the socks off him. And he was like, yeah, I'll do it. So I think that's
Hmm.
probably how they got. I mean, I think they used Bill Murray to get all these people on board.
That does track. Because again, there's lots of gags that seem like the throwaway lines. Like for example, oh, we have Mary Lou Retton playing Tiny Tim, and then no, that's actually Mary Lou Retton on screen. Or like we have Bob
Oh
Hackett
my
playing
god,
Scrooge, and then he
fucking Bob
walks
Hackett.
across the screen. I'm
Oh,
like, what?
I know. Well, I mean, Buddy Hackett also is iconic,
Everybody
right?
Hackett. Yeah,
Something
right.
else that's interesting that you may not have noticed in terms of stars appearing on it very briefly. Um,
Mm.
there's one point where Bill Murray and his brother are walking on a New York street, and there are street performers there.
I know you're going.
And
Mhm.
it says like starving artists. Do you know who one of those starving artists is?
Mm-mm.
Miles Davis. Miles
Really?
fucking Davis. Are you kidding me?
Wow.
Like, and there's a couple others. I can't remember who the other two are, but like, how? How? I would love to know the story of how they got that.
Bill Murray.
Yeah.
Probably.
Well, and speaking of iconic actors, I mean, we're moving into the Claire Phillips stuff now. It's like you have Karen Allen from Raiders, and again, it's just like she's playing a very different character than she plays in Raiders of the Lost Ark, but still, I mean, her just pure warmth and charisma, like within seconds, you're just like, oh, I'm gonna fall in love with this character, right? I get it.
She's always very watchable. She's just a very interesting. She
Hmm.
makes interesting choices in terms of acting, and so she's just really easy to watch.
Yeah.
And her warmth, like you said, like her warmth comes through. Like you just truly feel an affinity with her.
And honestly, it's fantastic because like and I think her honestly really helps Bill Murray's arc because you immediately see the chemistry between those two actors on screen, and so you believe that there was a relationship there, even though it takes they present it and they go back to fill it in with the Ghost of Christmas Past moment. Um, but by that point in time, you're just watching stuff that you kind of already know on an instinctive level just because the way those two are on the screen. And so immediately you're like, okay, this guy's an asshole, but I want him to be worthy of this person. And so just the casting and the chemistry alone does a lot of heavy lifting for the story, which is really, really strategically good.
I will say, this is me. I'm not contradicting you, but I will say, I wanted her to just tell him to fuck off. Because you see this a lot in
Hmm.
movies, in life, these, giving women who give and give and give, and the men take and take and take, um,
Hmm.
present company excluded. uh, and so I wanted her to be like, you're a dick and I'm not taking it anymore. And she did a little bit. She did, like, she walked away
Right,
from him, but I
right.
really wanted her to give it to him, like, just, but that's maybe a different movie.
Well, I mean that's actually fair. I mean, there were certainly points in the later part of the film which got a little uncomfortable on that front. Um, but just in terms of, I was talking about just in terms of like Bill Murray and Karen Allen being on screen together, right? It's like I want to see these people keep talking to each other because I like watching them both on screen. And so in movie language, that is the okay. I want them to have reasons to be on screen together. And I want them to generally like each other. So please have the movie go in that direction. That's what the audience is kind of going to have sympathy for. But you're right that particularly when she is trying to talk to him and he's trying to be the boss scene, that certainly it's not that it doesn't do Bill Murray any favors. Rather, it shows that he's still got a lot of work to do, right? Because there's someone he clearly cares about in front of him, and yet the job keeps getting in the way, and the job means that he's an asshole. there's certainly, I could see an argument of her going, I could see what kind of person you are right now. It's the judge someone by how they treat the waiter dynamic, right? But I also recognize that romantic movies in the 80s sadly
Well,
just
at some
didn't
point, though, it's
engage with
also
that.
the fact that even if you're in a relationship, you don't necessarily see the person in front of you. You see the person that you want them to be. Hence, her only referring to him as Lumpy throughout the entire course of the movie, regardless of what he does, because that is her
Right.
version of him, even like 10, 15 years later. So, regardless of who he becomes, that is who she sees him to be. And that in and of itself has a power associated with it. Even if it's him telling them to staple antlers onto the
Mhm.
head of a mouse.
Well, and that scene is
Mhm.
where the quote that I read at the beginning comes from, and I find that, like, I love that quote. I just think because frankly we've all been in a situation where you're trying to get a thought out, and like somebody's making a lot of noise, and
Yes.
it's like, for the love of God, just please stop for a minute. So I love that, but I also I think it speaks to what you guys are talking about, which is um that it also brings out his real self at that moment, right?
Right. Mhm.
That he's trying to be the nice guy in front of Claire, but because there's this other thing happening, it does bring out the beast, if
And I
you
like
will.
that it plays on a level that it
Yes.
establishes that he can't have both, even in this scene, because when they stop hammering, the entire set falls apart, like completely falls apart. So it shows that he needs to make a choice of which version of himself he wants to be. It's not subtle, but it's not something that you really notice right then. It's
Mhm.
like, it's a funny joke. Executive woman gets hit with a barrel that rolls towards her. Ha ha ha! Funny.
Yeah, that whole
Right.
thing, I hate that. That is a cliche 80s like gag, like with the woman who gets like, it doesn't have to be a woman, it could be anybody who gets like,
In
Right.
Ghost,
I I,
in
I hate that whole thing. I can do with that.
Well, in particular, I know that it was a very strong, "Oh, let's beat up the censors because, oh my god, we hate censorship." That was very much
That's
an
true.
80s thing.
That is true. So maybe, yeah, maybe at the time it would have been a little bit more.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of
sorry, sorry.
Ghostbusters, like where um
Yep.
in Ghostbusters, like Peck is supposed to be the asshole from the Environmental Protection Agency, and it's like now it's like no, Peck has a lot of good points that you
And
really
Peck
should
gets
be
that same
thinking
treatment out the
about.
entire time. I do want to take a step back as we're talking about
Mhm.
amazing talent on the screen. We've referenced the character name, but we didn't say who it was. So Grace is doing incredible work by the phenomenal Alfred Woodard, as she's like killing it. And I want to make sure that we mention her name specifically in all the people that we're mentioning.
Mhm.
Like
Oh,
that
sure,
is
yeah.
even more talent added onto this. And to,
I said it. I
No,
said it. You didn't
that's
hear
wonderful.
me. I
okay,
said
making
it.
sure.
Alfre Woodard is
Yes.
amazing. I mean, she's, and at the time, I think she had already won awards. Like, she was already like a name. She was already a name.
And
Yeah.
for me,
For sure.
less they're not so much a big name like those people, but the Ghost of Christmas Past, Buster Poindexter, as his stage name. I love Buster Poindexter. I loved him as like a musician. I
Yes,
loved him as an
yes.
actor. And the Ghost of Christmas Past is fucking phenomenal. I love it.
He's phenomenal throughout it,
It's
like from beginning to end. At the end when she says, "Take me to the whatever building. I need to be there in 3 minutes," and he says, "Which floor?" Or whatever. I mean, I
Like
love
constant
that.
timing.
Like,
Even
right.
because
it's so,
when we watch it together,
yeah, and
we
he's
turn and
just
look at each
true.
other and we
Yeah.
commented like the timing between Bill Murray and Poindexter was like spot on the entire time. It's like back and forth, way to beat, jump in, and it was
And that's
The other thing I found fascinating was that this movie came out the same year as
I'm sorry,
Beetlejuice,
movie.
right? And Ghost of Christmas
I'm
Past has
sorry.
Beetlejuice.
one
I'm
more
not saying it one
time.
more time. No, 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 no. But I mean, but Ghost of Christmas Past has strong Beetlejuice vibes in the way it's
Gotcha.
presenting him. Nope,
Oh.
there were spaces in the middle. Doesn't count. It has to be 3 times in a row.
If Eddie's not here
I'm on
next
to you,
time,
Spivey.
you know why. The Keaton got you.
Shrunken head and all. Yeah.
No, see, he has to get a passport to come over and get me, so it's all fine.
That's interesting.
But
I
yes,
didn't think
there's
about
something
that. That
weird.
is interesting. Like that they're
Yeah, there's kind of weird late '80s ghosts manic vibe that seemed to be happening because they could not have inspired each other just because of the timing of it
yeah.
all. So something in the
Well,
air.
and as Chris knows, I am a sucker for anything time travel. Like I love that stuff.
Hmm.
I love the whole idea of sliding doors. I love the idea that, you know, you make a choice and it goes one way, you make a different choice and it may go another way. I love that. So that whole element of like whether it's a ghost taking you back or some other way of you returning to a different time, I just love all that. And I love being able to look on as an like I wonder what it would be like. I mean, this is getting a little bit deep. I wonder what it was like would be like for me to walk in to my childhood as an
Hmm.
onlooker. Um you know, and for some people it would be absolutely tragic and for some people it would be, you know, beautiful and wonderful and any mix of all of those things. So I love that stuff. So I love that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, totally. And I know also weirdly seeing Cross's childhood kind of actually hit me a little harder than I expected because I was a
Hmm.
latchkey kid growing up. So my parents were often, my mom was at work. My dad left. So a lot of times it was me at home by myself watching TV. That's how I entertained myself. And so the kid sitting in front of the television because that's all he had. I was like, that actually stunk. That really helped me to soften to Cross in a way that I was not expecting. I don't know if that was entirely the intention, but it certainly helped me to go, okay, I actually see a
And
bit more
same
where
thing
he's
for
coming
me
from.
because I think I mentioned on the podcast, but I was raised by my grandmother, and she worked a lot to be able for us to have
Hmm.
a house to live in and heat. So I spent most of my time alone watching TV. Hence my deep knowledge of Police Academy and The Hobbit. Um, but so that is how I grew up, and that resonated with me in a way I was not expecting, which is one of the reasons why I never fight when Jill wants to watch this movie. I'm always down for it because that shows me, reminds me of
Hmm.
what my childhood was and what I strive to have our kids' childhood not to be.
Hmm.
Yep.
I had a
Hmm.
very lovely childhood, so I'm not really one to contribute to this, but I will say when I watch that scene, I do think of like, I mean, my father grew up with a father who was an immigrant from the old country,
Hmm.
and you know he tells stories about his parents, you know, constantly yelling and screaming, and he like Chris, you know, has said like that will not be me, right, and made a conscious choice not to do that. So I see, you know, I see echoes of that in the film as
I
well.
think what you're really
Yeah.
leaving out
Yeah.
is
I
that
can make
you
a
don't want to
choice to
admit that
follow
your grandfather was a butcher, and so your dad, in fact, would bring home 5 pounds of beef on Christmas just to say that we don't
Is it?
celebrate this holiday. Boom, veal, motherfuckers, is what happened every
I mean,
Christmas.
it is true. My great grandfather, I mean, my grandfather was a butcher. Like he really was. He was a butcher. So my dad can learned how to cut meat. It's great. But yes, so there is a lot of connection.
Yeah, and like the gag about the where Cross is trying to be like, that's $23 for veal, just turning down there, and I'm like, that's not. I see your point there. Actually, I know
Yes,
it's a joke, but I'm actually on your side on this
right.
one.
As a grown up, like that's a big
Yeah.
deal.
So for
I mean, we won't talk about the like the humaneness or unhumaneness, whatever that
inhumanity,
word is, of veal in general, but like,
Yeah. Well, yeah, yeah,
but
yeah,
for
yes.
our TTG RPG listeners
yeah.
that are vaguely familiar with Harlem Unbound, I did a lot of research for Harlem Unbound, and I did a lot of research in Jewish community. But one of the things that I also did is I talked to my father-in-law in detail about like his father and all the different things that he went through when he came here, and that helped shape to influence some of the writing for Harlem Unbound. Like without that input, the book would not be what it is, and all the work itself wouldn't be the same without
That's really
Jill's
cool.
input and advice, constantly like pushing me to make it better or saying that that sentence is not a real sentence, you should make it one. And so I want to give credit where credit is due, and we're at a point where I can actually talk about it based on the 5 pounds of veal, which is a joke I made during the first night of Hanukkah last night.
I love when people have a shared media knowledge. You could just make those kinds of references. That's always fun.
Anything?
Anyway, I want to jump ahead to we talked briefly about the apartments where Claire and Cross are together. I admit, hippie Bill Murray was not believable
What?
to me at all.
You mean the guy from Caddyshack that possibly ate a baby Ruth you can't envision as a hippie? It was maybe a baby Ruth or maybe something else that's brown that floats in a pool.
Bill Murray may have a lot of strengths as an actor, but he is always very firmly in the yuppie category, particularly in his 80s era of history. I mean, that is the stratum of society that he exists in, and he is good at that stratum. And so him with a very obvious wig,
but the same receding
trying to
hairline
pretend to
as he has,
which was a great joke. I have to admit that was a great joke. And they even pointed out, Claire makes a side comment about the hair, which I thought was just a nice little bit of cattiness I loved. But just them, we're gonna live in this small apartment and we're gonna make it work and we're all artists, and I'm just like, I am not buying this at all.
No, I agree with you.
I will push back on that. I will to say that for a relationship, for a short period of time, you are willing to do a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. Having gone out with a woman that was very bohemian, anyone that knows me knows that I am not bohemian. Like, I'm goth, I'm a professional, I'm a lot of things. Bohemian is not one of them. Mm-hmm. I had my own minor bohemian period for about a year. Didn't last, didn't stick, won my thing.
Mm-hmm.
And Jill found out new information.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Is it? Maybe. I do think, yes, you do try to shape yourself in some relationships to fit sort of what you think they want or what you think they are.
That's a
Look how painful that was for Eddy to say. It's like dragging nails across a board. Like, yes, it is.
No. No, I'm not. Was it painful? I was thinking as I was talking.
Well, that's like, can I tell you, my
down.
boss, we were in a meeting, and now it's a running joke because someone gave an idea and he goes, well, that's not the worst idea. And so like, now that's the thing, that is the thing that we just say over and over again. So it's the worst idea?
Right.
Okay, good.
What is the worst idea? Is it the worst idea? But no, I was saying my initial perspective on that was because Bill Murray's character was trying to sell it like this was a big point of his life. But if we reframe it to he's telling himself that, then I think that does all track. That makes a lot more sense to me then. Because initially I was just like, no. But if that's the gag, right? If that's the joke, is like, it's so obviously not this, and he's trying to tell himself it is when all evidence to the contrary says that that's absolutely not what's happening here, then I can now see that actually was the point of the joke.
Which sticks to everything he's done so far, like how he goes back and tries to talk about like the veal's price is why it's this, or why no, it's not this thing that he's feeling. So it's constantly there, just reinforced little bits, and that is him sort of like shaping it more.
I had seen it as he was softening up and being more open, but if he's still self-delusional, then actually that just track and actually solves another small bump I had later. So actually that works out. Awesome. This is why I like having these conversations.
So let's take a pause for you, Reed. So Jill, how are you enjoying the podcast so far that you've listened to 3 times out of over 100 episodes?
I like it. It's fun to talk about these things because I don't. Now I will say, I'm always amazed by you, Chris, and your friends and your colleagues in this world who remember things about movies and shows months, years, decades after you saw them. I don't have that memory for things. If I hadn't just seen this again, I would remember because I've seen it like a lot, but I don't have, so I'm always, a lot of times when Chris and I are with like a group of people and he sort of breaks off into a conversation about media and stuff, I glaze over because I'm like, it's I just can't.
And I keep those short
but it is
because you
interesting.
glaze over.
I mean,
The look of skepticism that's happening right now is amazing. Short. I mean, it's under 2-hour episodes. I suppose that's short.
So this is interesting because I'm part of that conversation rather than totally glazing over.
So behind the scenes, we've been really busy for the past few months. But one of the things I tried to do is I tried to wait as long as possible for us to watch the movie. And so we watched it the day before we did the recording. So it was right now it had been 24 hours ago we watched this movie. Literally 24 hours.
It's fresh. It's fresh. Yeah.
Right. And honestly, I mean, that's how we do a lot of this podcast, right? Like I watch these, even things that I know I've seen 100 times before, I still watch them again because sometimes I see new things, but also I just forget entire subplots and stuff like that. So yeah, no, I have a brain like a sieve. Stuff just falls. I thought we had this handy document that I'm motioning at that the viewers can't see.
It's the hand gestures that you make towards it
of all stuff
that are really impressive for the listener.
Right, I know it's so important. Anyway.
Yes.
Anything else about the Ghost of Christmas Past?
I want to say that I have been in New York enough, and I've had taxi drivers like that, and they are not as cool as Buster Poindexter. That's it. That's all.
Who is?
I do like that his cab looks different. So from a set design, from a scene design perspective, like his cab does not look like a New York City cab of that time.
No, yeah, it's older.
It reflects more of the past, which I think that's a great choice that they made. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. After the visit, Frank goes to the shelter to see Claire, hoping to make amends. However, his attitude quickly sours, and he shows his contempt for a homeless man named Herman and the shelter workers. He returns to the studio, but not before telling Claire, "Scrape it off, Claire. If you want to save someone, save yourself. This will not come back to haunt him." The ghost of Christmas Presents arrives as an ethereal, sweet-voiced fairy who punches, kicks, and slaps Frank to focus his attention. She takes him to Grace's apartment, showing his assistant struggles to support her large family, including her youngest son, Calvin, who has remained mute since witnessing his father's death. The ghost then shows him James spending a humble yet festive Christmas with a group of friends and his wife, Wendy. James still defends Frank, despite Frank's cheap gifts and his refusal to share in Christmas celebrations with him. The ghost leaves him in a utility space under the sidewalk with Herman, who Frank finds to his shock has frozen to death. Again, cheery Christmas movie.
I remember finding that bit as a kid very disturbing.
I found it disturbing when we watched it yesterday.
I
know as an adult I was a little disturbed by it.
What I was trying to figure out and analyze it more because I don't tend to do that without being prompted like this. Why he is dead with a smile on his face and holding his watch. It's just it's an interesting thing that I still don't understand why they made that choice, but he's still happy as he dies.
So this is where I noticed the lighting cues, and I actually had to look at the lighting to get a cue. I don't think this actually happened. I think this is part of Frank's dreamlike state, because the lighting there is different from the way the lighting has been in other parts of the movie. That's the only way I can explain it, honestly, because it's just a little too surreal to be. I mean, like, people freezing to death in New York is definitely a thing. Don't get me wrong. Homeless people freezing to death is a horrible, awful thing that really absolutely happens. But you're right. The way he's sitting felt a little unnatural, and so I thought it was that this was a metaphor.
I would like to totally agree with you, but I can't, because the end of the movie we see him with the ghost, so that implies that he died in the movie. I think the reason they have him sitting like that, as a character himself, on the whole, when we saw him, was generally happy and affable, but it's a way to undercut the actual horror of that scene. If he had been huddled in a corner with like a blanket half over him, frozen to death, that is a very different vibe than what we get with Frank finding him just frozen to death, which is horrific. Like, there is a PG and a PG-13 is what I'm going for.
Oh, sure. Like from a production standpoint, obviously you want to reduce the amount of horror because again, the whole movie's been very carefully walking that line. So that part I get. Given the fact that Cross has repeatedly hallucinated up to and through these scenes, and then we cut back to see the reality of the scene, you could argue that we're both right. You know, that he is actually dead, but how Frank sees him is not what's actually there.
Yeah.
And the watch to me is
Um,
interesting because like it's all this whole thing is
yes.
about time, right? Past, present, future.
Mhm.
And so the way that the watch drops, it's like time is, time is fleeting, time is moving. So yeah.
Yeah. hmm there's a lot of metaphor in a movie, which is again the movie's kind of a blunt hammer of black comedy, not in a bad way, maybe, but it's very clearly making sure you clearly get what's going on there. So the fact it does do metaphor occasionally is actually kind of interesting. It's a little here's something that's a little less overt that acts as a different layer on top of the stuff's happening, so it gives it a little bit of depth at times, which
And a
is
little bit
actually
more to your point,
really
Jill,
cool and
about the
refreshing.
watch dropping, is that it doesn't drop until Frank touches him, which reinforces to Frank that his time is running out. But
Mhm.
like that was a very nice touch. Or if you want to go more for where I was going from the horror aspect of it, it's when he touched him, that bone broke because he was dead. All about happy, warm, and shiny. It's like Christmas.
But again, this is so 1988, right? Because like showing a frozen dead person, that's too far. But a guy's femur breaking before someone falls to their
But
death,
there's
that's
an
cool.
obvious difference.
you know, sure, one is obviously clearly fantasy death
Yeah.
situation as opposed to one that's more of a real life situation. I get that, but still, it is a disparity that is both interesting from a cultural perspective, but also I think plays into again the ongoing
Which then
black
goes
comedy
constantly
vibes of the whole movie.
counteracting the fact that it's all fantasy for Frank, because even after Hayward in his office disappears and Frank finishes his drink, he spits out the golf ball that popped out of Hayward's head. So like that goes back to show you that Lee's visions are actually happening to some extent. So that's a nice little balance it plays with it.
Mhm.
And while I'm backtracking, I want to point out that Bryce is played by Lionel Luthor. So it's always good to see Lionel. I hate his son Lex, but I support him somehow in the end from Smallville. We did a small cat Smallville episode, so that is for the Smallville people to know that we know that's Lionel Luthor, a very young Lionel Luthor at that.
Right. Well, I mean, everyone was younger in '88. I assume it was. So anything else about the Ghost of Christmas Present section? And we kind of talked a little bit about the
I wouldn't want Carol Kane to punch me in the jaw.
violence.
I can tell you that. Looks like she knows how to swing a punch.
God, no. Oh, the other 80s cultural touchstone is they're playing Trivial Pursuit.
Yes. And the callback that they do at the end to that is just beautiful. And of course, all of us who grew up in the 80s, like that Trivial Pursuit question is easy, right? I mean, we all, and I think they choose that for a reason. Like they didn't choose something obscure. They chose something where all of us were going to be screaming at the screen, SS Minnow, you know?
Right, because it connects you to Frank more.
Oh,
yeah.
And one more thing I guess on the present part is they do a solid job, which we talked about before, of cementing it on Grace's family and like making Grace's family part of the heart of the movie.
Yeah.
So when that comes back at the end, it means more. And they submitted them in Harlem, and I can make a Luke Cage joke about Alfred Woodard, who's in Luke Cage and in this, both happening in Harlem. But I'll put it aside.
Nice. Like at first, I was unnerved when they were dressing up one of the kids as a tree, the mute kid as a tree, and I'm like, that's a little harsh. I know kids are harsh, but it's a bit harsh. But then I realized that everyone's kind of in on the joke, a little bit. So, and it's like, okay, this is a family that ribs each other. Now I get it, and actually I like them better because that's how my friends and my family tend to act.
And then
okay, I get it now.
You can see the contrast because you've got their family that has so many family members, right? Like you see, and
Mm-hmm.
then you've got Frank's family that has like quite few family members, like not just
Mm-hmm.
in like the spirit of it, but like you just see that there's much more community. They may have less financially, but there's much more community.
Yep.
And again, the contrast
I could go
is
into
great.
now about an 80s stereotype
Right.
about things, but I'll let that one go because the movie makes it a poignant point for it, and it's less of a stereotype but relevant to the plot. But this is also where we establish the
I do
Zerbert
think,
in that scene with them.
oh God,
The Zerberts, yes.
that's an awkward
Not
thing.
here, it's
That
not.
is
Here it's
just an
funny.
awkward.
Here it's funny and family friendly. It'll become awkward very soon.
Oh yes, that is true.
Oh
That
yes.
is true.
Yes. Although again, I love how they kind of just gloss over. It's the Bill Murray's trying to make fun of the kid, and it's like, oh, it's because his father died, and he's just like, stopped, and they just move on. I'm like, that's dark.
Well, and they make that joke.
He watched his father
They
die.
make that joke. Oh, I thought she was just wearing black for a fashion choice. Like it's,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Right, and it's just like again, this whole movie. It's like, weird dark thing, quick beat on it, and then play it off with a joke, and then move on. That's this whole movie. And generally speaking, again, some stuff isn't aged well, but like generally speaking, it's really good job of pacing dark thing, funny thing, and then usually somewhere around there is a silly thing that happens. So you're always going through this roller coaster of tone, and it's just surprisingly well done. It's a hard balance to do. All right.
You're good.
Anything else about the Ghost of Christmas Present? Nope. Okay. Frank desperately tries to escape from the sewers, breaking through a boarded up door to end up back on the set of the production somehow, because that's how New York works. Preston directs Bryce to take over the rehearsals to give Frank some time off. Retiring to his office, Frank finds a drunken and deranged Elliot waiting for him, armed with a shotgun, ready to kill Frank for causing the loss of his job, family, and home. Frank escapes the elevator where the Grim Reaper-like Ghost of Christmas Future awaits. I can talk. The ghost takes him to the future where a now catatonic Calvin has been institutionalized. Claire has heeded Frank's words, leading to her marrying rich, leading a decadent lifestyle, and viewing the homeless with disgust. Finally, the ghost shows Frank's cremation ceremony where only James and Wendy in attendance. Frightened and remorseful, having initially mistaken James as the deceased, Frank is further shocked to find himself inside the casket as it's about to be incinerated. He breaks his way out and emerges from the elevator to face Elliot, elated to be alive, but oblivious to the fact that Elliot is still trying to kill him. Frank's completely changed demeanor surprises Elliot, particularly when Frank offers him a high-level executive position, which he accepts.
All right, I'm going to start this off by talking about the uncomfortable Zerbert. Like, I know we said a lot of important stuff, but the fact that you've got Bill Murray, I'm not even using I'm using real names. Bill Murray raises up Bobcat shirt, and physically, you hear it, juicy and sloppy sounds. Zerbert his belly, and I'm going to assume they weren't friends before this started. Maybe they're friends during the course of the shooting, but Eddie, we're friends. I like you a whole lot. At no point in time would I Zerber you. Like, that is not gonna ever happen, my friend.
I think, however, we need to take a moment to recognize the pure late 80s of this scene of a high-powered executive with a white man with a shotgun sexually assaulting him after giving him a raise is just the 80s in a nutshell.
We could talk about him sticking a phallus-like object into Bill Murray's mouth if you want to, too, if you want to go there. Then he assaulted him.
Right? There we go.
Jill, I love you, but at no point in time I think I've ever Zerbered you, and I do not think that is on my list of things to do.
God, I hope not. No. I also...
As it to a child?
Utterly uncomfortable with that scene. Jill made a shivering sound and feeling on the couch.
I'm sure was the intent. I'm sure that was the intent. It's just not good. It's uncomfortable in a bad way. It's not uncomfortable in a funny way.
The other thing that was weird to me was, Grace, they show her with her son who's institutionalized. He's maybe, I don't know, 7, 8 years older than he was in the beginning of this film. And yet she's wearing this like Star Wars-esque thing on her head, like a scarf. And it looks very Star Wars to me.
I could
like
see Alfred Woodard pulling off a Princess Leia thing. I'd watch that movie.
For sure. Yeah. But I felt like the future was it was interesting how pure fantasy it was. Like, in 8 years he gets institutionalized and she joins, Starfleet. Sorry, wrong one. Star Trek.
Funny part is my brain went to Clockwork Orange, but I think we're on the same page.
And then I love Claire in this.
Yes,
I love her. In fact, I was watching her and the choices they made for her makeup and her hair and what she was wearing, and I was like, that would be a fabulous Halloween costume. It's just so perfect, and the fact that she says scrape them off, I just and again, it's fantasy, but they clearly went like far in this fantasy, which I thought I thought was cool. It's not meant to be real, right? It's meant to be fantasy.
So here's my theory on that piece of it, right? Because it leads to one of the things I want to talk about is I love the fact that the Ghost versus Future, his face is a television screen. And so it's like your future is television. And so I looked at all of those as Frank could only see his future as television dramas. So like all of those are the scenes you would see in like a soap opera or a Lifetime drama or a science fiction movie. These are all shot like television shows, which again, because it's a movie, it looks a little different, and that's actually interesting and cool. Because they're all very stark sets. There's usually a couple people on there. It all feels like a relatively small scale television production. So that's how I read it. But you're right, all of them are kind of fantastical and over the top in a really good way. So to see that stuff on the large screen, I just thought that was a nice way to connect Cross's job with his future and showing that his future was just his job without actually necessarily hitting ourselves.
But it also
over
then links directly back to his past, because his entire past is related to television, and even the stories he was telling were all stories he saw on TV. So that would influence him as a person and his own future and how he views himself.
Yep. Right. Also, I love the fact that the Ghost Chris's future is that, again, that right balance of scary and silly. Because like I'm sure if I saw this as a kid, I probably would have been terrified by this guy. But look at it now; it's like it's a giant foam skeleton hand. So
yes, I love the perspective that they do in that shot, where it's like you see this giant hand.
Yes,
yeah, and I like that again. There was a big joke there where they have the actor playing Christmas Future from the Meta show.
Oh yeah. The actor was playing on the live show. Also
we
being
didn't talk about. We didn't talk about the restaurant scene. I mean, we touched on it with the Richard Pryor thing, but we didn't talk about the restaurant scene where he sees the guy catch on fire. That was an interesting, I just thought that was an interesting choice. I couldn't understand why they chose fire as his hallucination.
For the Richard Pryor gag.
I still don't.
It was all for the Richard Pryor gag.
All for the Richard Pryor gag?
Because the guy's fire starts with like his sleeve. Richard Pryor originally, I think, soaked himself in 151 and set his sleeve on fire. So it all goes back to them making a joke about Richard Pryor.
Oh, interesting.
Which is a horrible fucking joke then and now.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and then they have the eyeball in the glass. I mean, it's just random weird stuff for weird sake.
Well, I mean, all the hallucinations that he had in and around that restaurant scene were ultimately images he saw through the 3 visitations. I did catch that. But there were like the eyeballs. tied to the frozen guy in the thing because his
Oh,
eyes were written
right.
out there.
Okay. I'm catching on.
The
Fire is
fire
right.
because he was on
Yeah.
fire later. Yeah, so that was kind of is the let's take all those images, mix them all up, show them at the front end. So again, you're not sure how much of this stuff he's hallucinating because he saw those images before, and how much of this is
And
actually
the
happening.
other thing of
Got
note
it.
is if you reference it, like Robert Mitchum's character ordered a highball. So Bill Murray's character ordered a highball. They brought Robert Mitchum a highball. They brought Bill Murray a glass of
Mhm.
water with an eyeball in it. Which goes back to if you also think about Lou,
Mhm.
he pulled off Lou's shades and he commented about Lou's eyes. Because Lou didn't really have eyes. They were like little
Mhm.
lished out husk of things left.
Right.
And that was
Yeah,
John
it's
Forsythe,
not
right?
it's
Yeah,
not like
John Forsythe played Lou, right?
yeah, Forsyth, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's not like intricately plotted or anything, but it is enough that audiences who are paying attention but not like super hyper analyzing like we are going, oh, I remember that thing to this thing.
I
Okay,
look
yeah,
how
I see
you've
how that
seen
all
it a million
connects.
times. You just connected it for me, so thank you.
But on a subconscious level, you
Maybe, yeah,
probably are
sure.
connecting it, right?
Let's give my subconscious the benefit of the doubt.
I believe in you. Anything else
I want to go
about the
back actually a little bit
Ghost of
and
Christmas
talk
Future section?
about God, what's it? The dog that Frank was playing. I forgot the name of the dog now. With John Forsythe's character.
Oh, right. I know what you're talking about. I don't remember the name, but I know what you're talking about.
And
That where he's
how
playing
like
the
that
kids
goes
show.
back to touch on for a point in time of his life, he was willing to do anything to be bohemian, to be with her. But when he had an opportunity for a career, that's when you get to see who the real Frank is. And it's still, even at that point in his life, revolved around the TV show, because even then he focused on making that TV show successful. And throughout his entire childhood, it was all about the TV. Even his future is
Right.
about the TV. So he goes back to it's all about television. So like the more we talk about it, the more amazing the scripting and acting for this movie becomes for me as a viewer.
Right. And again, it almost makes sense that this failed as a theatrical film, but probably has now seen a lot better, partially because people probably saw it on reruns on TV. Right. And I feel like just it's a small thing, but again, subconsciously seeing a show about TV on TV makes that resonate better. Whereas in a theater, it's like you're just kind of making fun of TV now, and I kind of like TV, so yeah,
There's a great joke that they
But
do in
TV can
that
make fun of
scene
itself.
too, where he's something like, Frank says, "I know what you're doing. I know what you're doing," and then then the ghost of Christmas Past goes into the television, and he's like, "Hey, Frankie," and he goes, "What's going on?" Or I know what's going on, and then, what's going on? Yeah, so like it's a great
Right.
They really found places for that put in that humor really well.
Absolutely. Okay, then to finish it off, with Elliot's help, Frank returns to the production set, secures Bryce in the control room, and breaks into the show's live broadcast to speak of his new appreciation for life. He apologizes on air to Grace, James, and the cast and crew, and makes a passionate plea to Claire to come back to him. Claire sees this at the shelter and heads to the network with the help of the Ghost of Christmas Past. As Frank and Claire reunite, Calvin comes up to Frank and speaks for the first time, reminding him to say the words, "God bless us, everyone," much to Grace's elation. Frank leads the crew in singing "Put a Little Love in Your Heart" and sees Lou, the three ghosts, and the ghost of Herman smiling and waving back at him while singing along at the end credits roll. Then Frank instructs the people in the theater to sing along. Watching at home, James hails Frank as "my brother, the King of Christmas."
So I have read that whole end scene, most of that end scene was all ad-libbed by Bill Murray. It was not written.
I can see
I
that.
was wondering about
it's
that.
not surprising. I do think it's beautifully done, and I don't know how much of it was written, but there was one of the quotes that I was thinking about starting out with. Let me see if I can find it. I had made myself a note. Was he says, "It's Christmas Eve. It's the one night of the year when we all act a little nicer, we smile a little easier, we cheer a little more. For a couple of hours out of the whole year, we are the people that we always hoped we would be." It's beautiful. And then he says, and you can be that all year long. You need to do it. Like, it's really well done. And then if you're curious, as I was, why the heck
Mm.
at the end, when he's talking to us, the audience, and he says,
Mm-hmm.
join in, and you on this side and you on that side, and he says, feed me Seymour, which of course I know from
Mm-hmm.
theater. And I had
Right.
forgotten that he was in the Little
Yep.
Shop of Horrors right
He
right
was in Little Shop of
before
Horrors. Yeah.
this.
Him and Steve Martin.
And so,
Uh-huh.
yeah. So he was seriously just ad-libbing stuff that was coming to his brain. Yeah.
Right. And what's fascinating about it is that ad-lib actually ties into themes of the movie, right? Because again, I think this does better on television because what we have, what Chris pointed out earlier, is that he grew up watching television. He's obsessed with television, and for future Ghost of Christmas Future, as we talked about, is all framed in television. And so Cross finally breaks out of television. He breaks the fourth wall to talk to the audience. He has finally
Mm.
left television.
Yep.
He's finally outside of television, talking to the real world. It's a great. It's pure Bill Murray ad lib from what it sounds like, but it also really ties up the themes. His character arc is complete because he's actually escaped
But
television.
there's nothing
which is a
wrong with
beautiful meta
ad-libbing if you're
commentary.
ad-libbing in the space that you've created beforehand, which regardless of what you say of Bill Murray is
Right.
exceptional at doing that. Like hands down.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And
I mean, one thing I've always appreciated Bill Murray as a comedian is that he, like you said, very much inhabits the space of a character, and he will go right up to every single edge he can with his humor. But he's also very good about not crossing it, right? Like Ghostbusters actually is a really good example. It's like his character's supposed to be the arrogant prick, but he also recognizes that he's supposed to be the butt of the jokes to make sure his co-stars get their moments to also be funny, and he has to do that within the scape of the character he has carved out. Again, with Cross the same way, like he knows Cross has to be softer here and has to be a little more, he has to turn on the charm, if you will. But he has to give that moment for Grace and Claire and all of them to appreciate and have their and also give him a chance give him a little stick because he deserves it, and to take that graciously. So in that respect, he may not be a gracious person to work with, but in terms of screen time, he's a gracious character to make sure that I know my character needs to take a hit now because that's what this
And I
arc
want to take
needs
a
to finish
moment
on.
to call out Nicholas Phillips, who is Grace's son, who comes out to remind him about God blesses everyone and being a show stealer without talking throughout this entire movie. Like that is talent.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Did he ever
He didn't
did
do
he have
much. He did
did
like
he have a
3 or 4
career?
movies, I think, and that was it. And I think they were when he was still a kid. I don't know what happened to him,
Really?
but I want to take a moment to point out right now where his like big scene comes in and kind of steals the show from Bill Murray being awesome for like a second.
He does. And I will say also that the part of that end that really gets me is when um Bill Murray, Frank Cross grabs Claire and he says, Claire, the whole world, meet Claire.
Yeah.
There is something about
Yeah.
that moment. And again, it's him or his character kind of making room for this other actor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lovely, it's
I
a
agree.
lovely
And
moment.
even more
It just,
go ahead.
Yeah, because what he does, I'll just say, it's like, because I actually rewatched that because I had said, why is this so good? And what actually is happening is Bill Murray does that, and Karen Allen's doing a fantastic job of looking embarrassed, and her body language is all hunched up, but that makes you smaller on the screen. So Bill Murray actually takes a step back so that she has room on the screen to be diminished and sell that discomfort, and then he steps back in when she gets her confidence back. So he literally gives her space on the screen so that she doesn't get lost doing that character moment. It's
And before that, they
it's
take
so good.
time to build up her arrival. Like him going around, him like making out with a supermodel. And that was
Yeah.
nice, but what would we be better? And like saying, awesomely attractive woman. What's even better than that is this woman that I love and have loved. And they build her up even before they bring her out. Like that adds on to everything.
Right.
oh, speaking of that dancer he kisses, I also learned that this movie was the last appearance for the Solid Gold
What?
Dancers.
Because they saw their nipples?
Really?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I was surprised that this was the last appearance of the Solid Gold Dancers. I mean,
Wow.
that's childhood
Yeah.
for me, like those Solid Gold Dancers. Yeah. Phew.
Again, this, but I mean, actually, it's funny. It just finally hit me. That's also very much an 80s thing. Like having a ridiculous amount of stars on a holiday special is something we don't see very much anymore. But that was very much what you did in television at that time. Was you had all sorts of, because there were like 5 channels, right? And only so many places to put people on, so you could cram a whole bunch of people onto one thing because they had 3 other work options that month. Um, so the star-studded his charity thing or holiday thing was very much a thing at that time. So I didn't catch that just now, but you're right. So it makes sense that the movie would also similarly cast like that to emulate that style of
And
television production.
they've tried to
Again,
bring back
so
that
wild.
variety show or the review or whatever, and it fails every time. And I don't, and it's unfortunate because I like watching the old ones. Like Chris and I sometimes
Right.
will put on like old Carol Burnett variety shows or like
Yeah.
whatever. I mean, we still enjoy watching them, but
Muppet Show.
the new ones just really fell flat, and I don't know why that
It's
is.
it, it's interesting because I don't think England's lost that because they still do various. They have what they call Red Nose Day here, which is for children in need, which is a big charity. And Chris and I primarily know it because that's also where they tend to do new Doctor Who stuff every year. But also, it is just we're gonna have several hours of live television with tons and tons of stars, and raise a whole bunch of money, like 33 million
Wow,
pounds, I
wow.
think, this year. And it's a huge event that everyone kind of gets together around and builds around. Um, Similarly, the 2012 Olympics, they did a lot of that for the opening ceremony of 2012 Olympics is here in London. So I think that piece of it is still alive here, but you're right. At least in the U.S., every time I do it, it always feels forced and weird and arbitrary. Where maybe it's just our nostalgia growing up, but it always felt a little more kind of authentic back in the day.
Yeah, and it felt like these were
Like
people
everyone
you
wanted
really
to be
wanted
there.
to look forward to seeing. Now, some of this I'm gonna diverge a little bit. Some of this I think is
Mm-hmm.
that celebrities are much more
Mm-hmm.
accessible to us through social
Yeah.
media. So there
True.
no longer is that mystery about them. I mean, part of the charm of the Rat Pack, for instance, is that when they're doing a
Mm-hmm.
live show, which they have recordings of, you hear their stories, you hear them talking, but you didn't hear that all the time. You only heard that in bits and pieces if you were at the show or on selected interviews on television. And so you didn't know them as people, you knew them as personas. Whereas now I feel like
Mm-hmm.
because of social media, we get to know them
A lot more.
more as people. And so the mystery and the allure of that celebrity is gone. So I
Right.
think that may
That's
have an
true.
impact as well.
Because that's a really good point because like things like these Christmas specials or like the telethons or whatever were a chance to see these people's real people outside of either their characters or interview chat shows. It was a chance to see them a little more kind of ostensibly as normal people. So yeah, it's a good point. Is that we don't have a need for that peek behind the curtain
Yeah.
anymore.
Any closing thoughts on Scrooged? Let's start with Jill.
I still love this movie. It does have faults, many. I mean, there's lots of cringy moments now. We didn't even get to all the cringy moments, but there are plenty of cringy moments. Um, but I still love the message and I love that song at the end. Um, if I ever hear it on the radio, I feel like it should be on the holiday music channels more often because it is a great
We can
feel
make our own
good
playlist and put it at
holiday
the top of
Yeah,
it
song.
if you want.
Okay, well, let's do that. So yeah, I'm really glad. Thanks for having me on because this was really fun to talk about, and you've helped connect some dots for me too. So I appreciate that.
Eddie.
Yay. Um, I went into this primarily because it's like I haven't seen this movie, but I always love engaging with things that other people love because I find their infection to be exciting, and I love that connection. But otherwise, I wasn't going with any expectation. I walked away with it going, this is probably one of the better black comedies of the 80s, and also a satire of television that's up there with something like Max Headroom, which is its probably contemporary equivalent. And I just wasn't expecting that. Um, I can tell just from the energy of the movie that it was probably chaos on the set. Uh, but I think that adds to the charm of it because
Oh.
it reminds me of something like Noises Off or The Play That Goes Wrong, of where it's the chaos of the set is kind of part of the reason why you're watching it, right? And so you have the chaos of the diegetic Christmas special, and then the chaos of the production around the movie itself. The energy bleeds through both of those layers, and I think it adds to the whole kind of frenetic vibe of the movie. So yes, it has flaws, but I think if this movie were polished, it would lose something, right? The fact that it has flaws, I think, adds to its charm on some level because it is rough and spiky and has some awkward moments, but the whole thing leads to just kind of this pure passion project. This feels like a whole bunch of people were really excited about something, got together for a weekend, knocked out this movie, and said, "Okay, we're never discussing this ever again." That never happens. Bury this film somewhere in a vault. Um, but no, I mean, I'm not surprised to see that this is on a lot of people's favorite
A
lists
slight
of holiday
tangent for
films.
the our daughter loves The Play That Goes Wrong because they put out 2 or 3 seasons of the show of that, and
Mhm.
she's a huge theater person, much like her mom. And she's an actress, and she does like musical theater and other non-musical theater. And she loves that show. She's watched all the episodes multiple times. Showed it to her grandparents, who begrudgingly act like they're interested as she watches it with them. So the fact that you mentioned it, I had to throw that out there for Z
Mhm.
because it's true, and she does.
Yeah, so my wife and I recently watched a live version of Noises Off, and she reminded me that there was a movie version with John Ritter as the
Yes.
lead, and
That
I
was
want to go watch that now because, but I
Kevin
mean, I bring it up
Kline, I
because
thought,
also
and
it might be
Sally
a good
Field,
pairing
right? Or am I
for.
thinking of something different?
You're thinking of Soap Dish.
I think it's something different because Noises Off was definitely John
You're
Ritter.
thinking of Soap Dish.
Because there's a physical moment where someone falls down the stairs in the play that as soon as I saw that, I was like, you're right, I have seen John Ritter do that moment before in a rerun. Because his falling
I
is
mean,
John Ritter has a very distinctive falling style, which is not something you normally say about people.
you guys, he was a brilliant, brilliant
Unbelievable.
comedian. And I know, like,
Oh God, yes.
Three's Company, while it was inane and ridiculous,
Mm.
was I mean, he's just, his timing, he is, yeah. I mean, when he died way too early, way too soon.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. He was the last. Him and Chevy Chase are the last kind of big physical comedians. Um, and John Ritter
Yeah,
died. And
Chevy Chase is
sadly didn't.
problematic.
So
I'm
there we
thinking
are.
of Soap Dish is what I'm thinking of.
Yeah. Oh right, okay,
I
yeah, that makes sense.
I agree. Scrooge is a great movie. I enjoy watching it. You can have nothing more insightful than what the two of you said. But what I do have that neither of you brought to bear is a game. You know, it can't end one of these other games. Oh, look at
No.
Jill's face. Her whole
Yeah.
face fell.
I,
So
I,
this
I
is going
wish
to
I
be an
could.
easy game, Jill, because you're a new guest. I won't make it as hard as I would have otherwise with just Eddie and I. For this game, it's going to be really easy. What is your favorite Bill Murray movie, not Scrooge, and why? I'll give Jill a minute because she's not used to the games, how I have to bring them out. But Eddie, we do this all the time. What is your favorite Bill Murray movie, and why that cannot be Scrooge, because we just talked about Scrooge's awesomeness? And you know what? For you, I'm going to add an additional
Right.
complication,
So
my friend.
like,
It cannot be Ghostbusters.
I was about to say, I was going to actually exempt myself from Ghostbusters. I mean, that's a little too easy. Um, So I honestly, I'm gonna go with the other work he did with Harold Ramis, which is A Little Shop of Horrors. We talked about that, because that's another fantastic film. And also, I think
I
Harold
should have
Ramis
clarified
work
more
in these
because
movies
Bill
also
Murray's a
showcased.
bit part player in that and not a real part of it. You got me. You got
Still
me.
in the
I'm
movie.
rusty. I shouldn't have had a big
Who
beer
counts?
for this game. I catch myself. I'm gonna get you next time though. Jill, Eddie has cheated at our game. Will you
I'm
cheat
not.
also?
What? No, I'm not cheating. Groundhog Day.
Oh, good
I love
movie.
that movie.
Why?
Yes.
Again, that speaks to my sliding doors
Ah, that's right.
fascination.
Yeah.
So you make
Yeah.
one small change and it can affect, the whole day. Or maybe it doesn't affect anything and you relive that day over and over and over again.
And it's so funny. Like Groundhog Day was supposed to be a kind of mild parody of time travel shows, and now it is the literal name for a time travel style paradox. Like most people, you go, how do you do a time loop? Oh, Groundhog Day. Okay, go. It's a shorthand for a time loop. I just love the fact that it tried to be fun of sci-fi and ended up defining science fiction.
I really love that movie. And
Yeah,
I will
it's
say,
great.
I hope she's not listening. Andie MacDowell is a terrible actress. I don't think she's listening.
Oh no, we've lost our listener.
I think she's so bad. She's in one of my favorite movies of all time, which is St. Elmo's Fire. Loved it. Talk about quintessential 80s movie. And she's bad in that too. Like she's just very stiff. She's just a very stiff kind of actress. So anyway, despite that, I still
Does she get better in any roles? You've opened a whole new door now.
No.
Oof.
I mean, she started out, from what I know, which I don't know a lot about her, she started out as a model. And then, as models do, they sometimes segue into acting. And now she was in, what was I watching? The Maid. I was watching a few, I don't know if you've seen this show. It's yeah.
Oh yeah, it's the new Netflix one.
I watched a few episodes of that, and she plays the mom to the girl playing the maid, and she plays like a pretty trashy, terrible person. Maybe a little better.
Jesus. All right.
Okay. Don't kill me. Okay.
All right, Chris.
For me, it's easy. Since I'm not using Ghostbusters and I'm not using Scrooged, and I will not say Groundhog Day because Jill chose that one. I would never say Little Shop of Horrors because that shouldn't count. It's gonna be Lost in Translation because I like Bill Murray playing an actor who's burnt out when Bill Murray was at a point where he was trying to figure out if his career was done or not. Like that is meta commentary on him, and Bill Murray bringing his A game, but is not his zany A game.
Yeah,
and you don't mind that.
I do like ScarJo. I'm not gonna lie. I was gonna leave that out, but Jill brought it up. I like ScarJo a lot from her Lost in Translation. I like Black Widow, but I like Lost in Translation ScarJo more.
Fair enough. Also, since I've cheated you and I'm happy with that, if I had an actual option, I probably would have the
Can I tell you something that you'll be upset about? I've never seen that movie.
What?
Wow.
Well, it looks like you're gonna watch that soon.
I'm just really
and
surprised.
I've never seen The Life Aquatic either. That's it, right? I think that's what it's called.
I don't think I've seen that one.
No, we saw that together, babe.
You might have watched that with your other husband, but not this one.
Well, what Wes Anderson?
We've watched a few Wes Anderson movies, but that was with Ralph Fiennes in the hotel. We watched it together. Of course, I know you've seen it. And we talked about watching Asteroid City, but we haven't watched it yet. Mr. Fox, we started but didn't finish.
Oof.
Jill doesn't like animated movies.
I can appreciate Wes Anderson. No. But here's the thing. I do like animated movies.
What? You don't like The Hobbit?
I am not my mother.
I mean, it has some animation in it. Things move occasionally.
I can appreciate Wes Anderson. Like I deeply appreciate Wes Anderson. I think he is brilliant. His movies just may not be for me.
The one you're
Those
thinking of that
mostly.
we watched would have been Moonlight Kingdom with Bill Murray, Edward Norton, and the
Yes.
two kids, one of
Yes.
which was like a scout. That's the movie you're thinking.
Yeah, that is the one.
Wes Anderson has filled my brain with useless information too. I need better hobbies.
Yes, blame
Yes.
Wes Anderson. That is
Any
exactly.
final closing thoughts on this podcast so we can end it because we're over 2 hours?
Good Lord. Nobody's going to listen to
We
this
got
thing.
2 people maybe.
You're probably right. I listened to it. I will say thank you for coming on. I appreciate you coming on, Jill. This has actually been quite a lot of fun, and I'm glad we did
Good.
this.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I did have fun. It's fun to talk shop and, I don't know, talk about something I love. So
Yeah.
that's good.
I enjoyed
Love
bringing
to
a couple of
do this
my
sometime.
favorite people together, so that's always fun for me.
Oh, I'm here
Thank
too. I figured you talk about you and Ziggy.
You've made your way in there over the past few years, you know.
Aw, yay! The threats worked.
I cashed all your checks. Don't worry.
Jill, are you on social media, or are you smart and have avoided it like the rest of us should?
I am on social media, but not you. I'm now off Twitter. That
Okay.
was, yeah, had to. I'm sorry, X, whatever
Yeah.
it
So
is
if you've
now.
noticed a decline in Darker Hugh's
Twitter.
cool, witty responses on X, it's because our social media manager is no longer on X. Now you're forced to deal with a writer who will not give you the same manner of wit, but will give you a lot more "fuck you, motherfucker" if you come at me with something I don't like.
There is
Right.
that. Yeah. So my other social medias are private. So sorry, but you can find
That's
me
fine.
through Chris anytime. We live together.
You can come
Well, then,
on. You
Chris,
can
how
come
would
on
they
to
find
X
you?
and talk to Dr. Hugh. And if you're an asshole, I'll tell you to fuck off and I'll block you. The best place to engage with me is on the Darker Hue Discord. I would like to sell books and things, but you know what? If I don't, I don't. But if you want to buy them, you can buy them at the Darker Hue Studios website. I got Haunted West. There's maybe 100 copies floating around. Otherwise, back to Patreon, and you may hear this episode early. You may hear a special, specific holiday episode for the Patreon that's not this one. And yeah, that's about it. What about you, Eddie?
I'm curious about this holiday special for Patreon that I haven't heard about yet. But I'm still on social media. Primarily, I am on Blue Sky and Mastodon. You can find me as Pugsteady through those. You also find me at my website, pugsteady.com. If you want to buy my stuff, the best way to find it is my creator-owned game, Realms of Pugmire, where if you want to play a dog with a battle axe,
Which my
you can do
daughter will
that.
have a copy of this holiday season.
Soon,
Very
soon. Yes, I have an autograph on its way to you now soon.
Hooray.
But otherwise, yes, the best place to find most of us is through the Darker Hue Discord. That is really where we hang out today. We had some great conversations on there, both about this podcast and about Doctor Who and whatever else is on our minds. So if you like this kind of discussion, definitely come hang out there. If you want more of this beyond just the free podcast we give you, back the Darker Hue Patreon, because we do have bonus episodes on there. And other than that, this is dropping around the holidays. So whichever holidays you celebrate, I hope they are good ones. And we will see you next year with more stuff. I've already forgotten what the next episode.
Be
Next
seeing
episode
you.
of stuff. Bye.